Have you ever wondered whether the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment, and acted from that place?
Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your hosts Brian Berneman and Kayla Greenville, who believe that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world.
We are here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers.
From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world. Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host, and I have the pleasure to be joined all the way from Australia and Victoria by Jem Fuller. Thank you, Jem, for taking the time, for being here, for really doing what you're doing, because we need more of this conscious communication. We need more leadership. We need to show up better in the world, as I believe. But I want to explore these topics a little bit more in depth during this episode with you. But first of all, thank you for being here. And for everyone that is listening, can you share a little bit about who is Jem?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for offering me to come onto your show. I'm very appreciative. So, who is Jem? I'm 50. We can start there. I reckon I'm about halfway through my life. I don't know. I mean, we never know when we're going to die, right? But I'm going to presume that I live to about 100. So I'm halfway through. I'm happily partnered. My partner is a wonderful human being, a gorgeous woman, and we're very lucky in relationship. We both came to the relationship with two of our own children. So I've got two teenage boys. My boys have just turned 18 and 16. My partner has a teenage girl at 15 and a younger boy who's 12. So we have the Brady Bunch. And again, the kids have all been around each other long enough to just relax into it they're actually very happy to see their mother and my boys to see their father in such a beautiful, conscious, kind relationship. We both came from marriages that had become quite toxic is a strong word, but to some degree toxic and certainly not being very nice to each other. And so for our children growing up watching that, I was always very conscious, very aware that was role modeling for them, and I didn't want them to see that. Anyway, that's a long story, but now over the last 6 or 7 years, they've been able to see what a really beautiful relationship is. So that's me personally, son, brother, community member. I sit in men's circle with a group of men down here. We sit around a fire once a month, have done that for about 12 years, and talk about meaningful themes and just hear each other, just listen to each other. So yeah, I feel well placed in a really lovely community. My mission is to help people create more ease and more flow in their lives. The wording of my purpose to myself when I wake up in the morning and say, right, let's go, because I'm very motivated. But my mission is to help people create habitual perspectives and practices that bring them more ease in their life, more flow, more success in inverted commas, whatever that is for people. And so, my bread and butter work, I'm a leadership coach. I have senior leader clients across government departments here in Australia and in the private sector also, mainly in the health sector. I work with a lot of health practitioners. And then also in the not-for-profit sector, there's a couple of clients who are quite large disability inclusion organizations. So I work with really beautiful people doing good work and just help them become better leaders. And my team is, we're reaching out into the States at the moment. I published a book recently, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And, so my team are reaching out into leaders in the States, and we're building an online leadership communication program, which I'm really excited about. That's getting launched in about 6 weeks. And I've got an online resilience course, which was built just before COVID. So working in the space of more conscious leadership, helping people build healthier workplace cultures so people can get along with each other better, communicate better, and then be more effective in the work that they're doing. So that's me in a nutshell, man. What do I love? I love the outdoors, massive outdoors fan. Surfing, hiking, camping. I love music. I've been writing songs, playing the piano and the guitar forever. That's about it.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And, there's a lot of topics that you already mentioned that I want to go and explore a little bit more. But before we get into that, how did you get into all of this? How was your journey to get into all of these different avenues and perspectives?
Yeah, sure. I mean, before I was formally applying myself to understanding human behavior and working in this space, throughout my life, I always had a burning curiosity about humanity, especially people that were really different to me. So I spent most of my late teens and right through my 20s and early 30s pretty addicted to travel, to be honest. I just wanted to keep traveling. But I wasn't interested in traveling to cultures that were similar to where I grew up. I was really fascinated about traveling to cultures that were really different to mine. Mm. And at the time, I felt like it was just my adventurous spirit. But I look back now and I understand now that I was actually driven for this cross-cultural communication, this cross-cultural connection. I wanted to find out what I had in common with peoples who, grew up in a completely different geographical place on the planet to me and had a different culture and a different set of beliefs. They looked different to me. The food they ate was different. And I was really curious to sit with them and connect. So that was the drive behind all of my travel. So there's always been a curiosity in humanity. I've always been quite introspective as well. As a writer, originally writing songs and poetry and then now books, I was always quite introspective, through my 20s. I smoked a lot of hash, man. I smoked a lot of weed and also it did a lot of exploration with psychedelics as well, because I was curious into the nature of the mind. This was when I was in my 20s. I explored that as much as I wanted to then, and I haven't felt the need to since. I don't smoke anymore. I don't do any drugs anymore because I've kind of understood what I could understand from that. I'm now more interested in the mind and the nature of the mind through meditation. So that's what I've been enjoying for quite a long time now, is a practice of meditation. So how did I get to what I was doing? When I became a father, I'd been just kind of bumming around the world for a long time. I'd never had a career. I'd never had any qualifications. I've done everything from fire dancer to traditional tattooist to kindergarten teacher in Taiwan to volunteer in Bangladesh to laborer in London. I've been a punk, squatting in abandoned buildings, and I've lived a very colorful life. And then when kids came along, I needed to get a job. So I got a job working for an international travel company because I'd been traveling, ended up in senior leadership. And then when I was in senior leadership, the company I worked for were quite good at spending money on development, professional and personal development. So we had a coach come in from the outside, and he is a human behavioralist and a profiler, very, very good at what he did. And he came into the senior leadership retreat one time, and it was like magic. It was just, he understood us behaviorally really well when he just met us. And to me, it was like magic. I'm like, man, how do you know me so well? You've just been listening to me talk for half an hour and you've got me completely, understood. So I was fascinated in that, and I asked him what he did, and he told me that he'd studied NLP and coaching and human behavior, etc. And I decided I wanted to do that. Then comes the midlife crisis, where I lost my career, my marriage, my house, my everything, except my kids. I kept my kids 50-50, week on, week off, but lost everything else. But decided that was the time for it to be my midlife awakening. And so I started all over again, and I went and studied coaching and studied NLP and human behavioral profiling, etc. Started my own coaching practice. This is about 10 years ago now, and haven't looked back since.
Thank you for sharing that. there's so much in there. And I can see, because I had when I was younger, that as well, that I don't know if it's called an itch or what, but to explore the world, to explore different people, to explore different cultures, living in different places, and discovering more of myself.
Yeah.
And that has been my path as well. And in a sense, I'm glad that I found all of this when I was like quite young. So it's not the same. But I just love something that you just mentioned, that like in the last part, that was really interesting. You said like the midlife crisis, and then you said midlife awakening. And I thought the same experience, very different perspective.
Yeah. I never thought of it as a midlife crisis. I use that term because that's what people know. And I use the inverted commas, midlife crisis. For me, it was always a midlife opportunity. And it was also a midlife awakening, because I had a remarkable experience in a North American Indian sweat lodge on Aboriginal land here in Australia with a group of men. And we were doing a sweat. I don't know if your listeners know what that is, but I'm sure you do. And I had an out-of-body experience and went back to being 5 years old. Anyway, long story short, this night I woke up the next morning after a very intense healing dream. And I realized, and at the time I was 41, I think it was about 41, maybe 40. And at the time I realized that I'd been harboring this subconscious belief that I wasn't enough, and I wasn't good enough. I wasn't smart enough or deserving enough or man enough, or insert here, whatever, all the insecurities that we tend to foster. And I'd had this belief in the background that I wasn't enough. And so because of that, I had created the life that I'd created for myself, a very unhappy marriage. I was pretending to the outside world to be happy. I had a great job and I had a beautiful wife and I had 2 children, and we built a house and we lived in a beautiful town. And so to the outside world, it was like a social media profile, but on the inside, I was deeply, deeply sad and tortured and dysfunctional. And so when I realized this, I was really curious as to, can I change that? Is it possible to change the wiring? And I found out obviously that it is, thanks to the understandings through neuroscience. We've got a Western perspective now on something that the great Eastern traditional wise ways of thinking have known for a long time. And so I went to work on myself, and I very literally and laboriously, with a lot of tenacity, I was determined, and it took me about a year of high repetition, and I just rewired. So I brainwashed myself into believing that I am good enough. I've got everything I need to be the best version of me, and that I'm okay. So I did this self-reparation work, which I still do now. It's become habitual, but I really had to do this self-love, self-acceptance piece of work so that I could be okay with myself, so that I could get out of my own way and go and serve. Right? It's easier to be of service if you're not caught up on all your own stuff. So I've created a daily habitual way of being really kind to myself and very accepting and also still passionate to go and make a difference in the world.
Yes. And there's something that I think that is so interesting. We live in a society, and mostly, I'm generalizing a little bit, which I don't like, but that we haven't done a lot of our inner work, a lot of that work of integrating and healing, and as you said, with that word, inner reparations. Like we grew up in a society that, for most people, our childhoods gave us a lot of different experiences that we weren't able to actually process, whether they were big traumatic experiences or small experiences that were still traumas in our body.
Yeah.
And how can we show up later on as adults for ourselves and then for others if we haven't done that work? And then how can we communicate our needs, our wants, how we want to live, our boundaries, if we don't understand them? And I think that is so important. And I want to explore that with you in terms of, I believe that you were sharing as well in terms of like conscious leadership. I believe conscious leadership as well in our lives as people, not only for someone that is in a, let's call it, leadership position. So can you share a little bit more around the importance of that inner work for being able to communicate consciously?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, isn't it? The idea of leading for me, in terms of self-leadership and being a conscious leader of self. Leading means that we're going somewhere, right? And so if we're not physically moving location, where are we going? Well, we're going into we're expanding into our potential. We're going to the next version of ourselves, with this self-work. So this healing process is the journey for us to continually keep becoming that next iteration of self. And hopefully this journey, the relationship with self becomes easier, not harder. The more self-love, self-acceptance, self-compassion, self-reparation work we do, then relationship with self becomes much easier, because you're not still holding on to or attached to the past, which is yourself, right? Your relationship with the past is really your relationship with self. And so as we do this work, and the mind becomes, when I say it becomes more quiet, I don't mean thoughts stop. Neurons are always firing. There's always the little bubbling brook of thoughts. I just mean that you're less identified with them. So it's less of a fight. There's less of you're not caught or stuck in this loop of identification with thought and motion. You can notice it, but just less affected by it. So for me, that feels like there's less static, there's less noise between me and you. So if I'm perceiving you, so I see you, I hear you, if we're in the same room, I could hold your hand and touch you. I'm perceiving you. If I've got a lot of noise going on in here, a lot of lenses, a lot of bias, a lot of belief, a lot of stuff, I'm going to get a very distorted version of you, because my perception of you in my mind has gone through all my lenses and biases and beliefs and all my hang-ups. Conversely, if I'm reasonably quiet in my mind, then when I'm sitting with you, I'm seeing you more clearly. I can really seek to understand more. Not completely. I can't completely see the pure version of you. I can only perceive you in my mind. But we can certainly see each other more clearly when we do this work on ourselves, which means that, there's more compassion for others then, and there's more, less judgment. We don't need to shout at each other. We can listen. Doesn't mean that we always need to agree. We can still disagree, but we can agree beautifully with respect and love, essentially. So it's a really beautiful practice. I guess some people would think of this as a very spiritual practice. I guess it is. I'm not really too concerned about what labels we give things, but we do need to use language to help us have a conversation. But certainly it helps in conscious communication, because communication is a sharing. Communication is to make something common. It's not a telling. If I'm telling you something, we're not communicating. it's a sharing. We have to come to some kind of understanding. That's communication. And so conscious communication is being aware of that, being aware of the other person or people, being aware of the reason why we're having this communication, being more aware, not being so stuck in the identification with your point of view. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. And, I think that there's a few things, and I want to ask you if you use at all these frameworks or not, but I have been introduced many years ago to nonviolent communication, and as well to understand in my life, and of course it doesn't always happen, but to create agreements or to create an understanding of what is happening, because sometimes I do have the time to sit with someone and to actually be and to connect from that place. And then there's other moments with some people that it's like, okay, we only have 15 minutes and we need to get to like the agenda items that we need to go through. And it's like, let's briefly create
an understanding.
Yes, because
I love that.
I when I was living, this remind me, I lived at a Tibetan Buddhist retreat center for a few years, and at one point we used there what it was called essential speech, which meant we only spoke if there was something that needed to be said. If not, we were silent. And that as a practice already was incredible. Yet at the same time, we had an understanding that if I said something like, if you were supposed to go and pick up that table over there and you hadn't done that, I would just say to you, hey, Jem, like the table needs to be picked up. And I'm not saying that from a judgmental place. I'm not saying that from a you need to, like, I'm saying that as that was agreed upon, and that is still there and you haven't done it. And what I noticed living there, because there were people sometimes that would come to live there after I was there, that if they hadn't fully understood that agreement, they felt attacked by me or by someone else saying things in a direct manner. And I realized okay, anytime that someone new comes to live in the community, we really need to sit down and have an understanding that when we're talking from a place of love and compassion and kindness, and we're doing it in that sense, just to be effective with our time. But it's not a judgment. It's not me trying to tell you off or anything.
I love that. It's so much easier if there's an understanding and consent even. There's a chapter in my book where I talk about consent and communication. And, the obvious topic or context when we talk about consent is sexual consent. I believe also it's functional if we can have consent even in communication. It's not always possible, but if there can be consent, the communication will definitely be more effective. If you, like you said, if there's an understanding, if you have permission, if you've given each other permission to speak from a place of love to share, then it's certainly much easier. And in a very practical sense as well, if you've got a team leader and they're responsible for developing the people in their team, and so there's a certain element of needing to be their coach, to coach them to being the next version of themselves. I say to all of my clients, if you can get consent, I call it the green light. If you get the green light to coach, your coaching will be way more effective than if you're just telling someone where they need to get better. But if you've had a conversation to frame the coaching, to put it into perspective, into context, and say, hey, part of my responsibility is to help you be the best version of you, to help you love your job, to help you thrive. Is that okay with you if I invest some resource, some time in helping you love your work? Is that okay with you? And the person says, yeah, that's great. There you go. You've got consent. Now you can coach. And, even as a father with my children, I can't always get consent to communicate with them, but I try. So if there's a time when one of your teenagers has done something and there needs to be a conversation around that because you're their parent and you need to help them hopefully grow up to be adults who are kind and nice and functional, etc. Before just going into the room and saying, that was blah, 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 and telling them, I'll come to the bedroom door and say, hey, I'd really like to have a chat with you about that. Would that be okay with you? And when they say, even if they don't want me to, but when they say, yes, Dad, we can have a chat, I've got consent. The communication's always more effective, because there's an understanding that we're going to talk about this now and the consequences, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I love that. Brian. The idea of an understanding is so good with conscious communication.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you in terms of the work that you do as well, because for me, in terms of communication, most people tend to focus on how we speak, how do we listen, how are we present. Can you speak of that receiving end?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's easier to listen and hear if you have been having a mindful practice, if you've been meditating over a period of time where you are training your mind to be present, you get better at not being so distracted. And so when you're listening, the more present you are, less distracted, you're not queuing up to speak, or you're not thinking about what you're cooking for dinner. You are just really present with that person seeking to understand. The person speaking, they feel that. They feel that you are right there with them, listening and seeking to understand, and they actually communicate more effectively. It's this beautiful symbiotic relationship energetically. The more beautifully you listen, the more beautifully they relax into their communication. And vice versa. If you're not really listening to someone, if you're kind of distracted, or you're thinking about how you're going to debate them or refute what they're saying or add your point of view in, if you're just queuing up to speak, or if you're not even present, you're thinking about something else, they start to stumble over their words. They become clunky in their communication because it is a relationship. It's this beautiful symbiotic relationship, and we are of the same entity in communication. So we affect each other very much.
Yes, like I have done, as you can tell from some of my experiences, a lot of practices to be mindful, to be able to listen to what I might call hold space as well when I'm working with people as well, to be able to be there present for someone else. And that a lot of times I feel like it's one of the most important gifts that we can give to someone, is to just be present. And as you're saying, there's such a tendency to want to interject in someone's sharing, or to hijack the experience. It's like that happens to me as well, without giving the space for the other one to share, because we all want to share, and that's something that is there. And one of the things that came up in whilst you were just talking was a time that I had a partner in the US, and she met my family like in Argentina, and the way that at home we would just communicate in the dinner table, I never noticed this, but until I had someone else saying like, why are you all screaming? why are you all fighting? And it's like, oh, we're not, we're just talking. But it's such a, like, going back to like different cultures that you were talking at the beginning, like there's all of these different ways, and being, I don't know if it's because it's Latin or what, but it's this way of talking that it's suddenly like it's getting louder and louder and louder, and the only reason like someone will listen to you is because you were the loudest one. So I was just thinking about that, and it's like in my experience, I just see that I'm like, wow, I have gone from that way of communicating. Even my entire family has gone from that way of communicating to a much more conscious way of doing that by creating space. And I'm in a sense fortunate that my parents and my siblings, in a certain extent, have gone on retreats, have experienced and practiced, so we can meet each other within that, and that's not always the case in all families. So from that place, I'm really grateful. Yeah, so I wanted to ask you a little bit more around that, especially with families. You're saying that you have a much more conscious relationship now with your partner. How does that look like for people that are now in a relationship and potentially they find that they are either arguing or having difficulties just from a communication standpoint? What are some of the things that you can share from your own experience?
Yeah, sure. Well, before I do, I have to share with you, I was imagining you and your family and how beautiful it is that they've also been on retreat, but I was imagining a different Argentinian family where just one person went on retreat and practiced for years and became, more quiet. And when they would come back to their family and their family's all speaking loudly and talking, and the family would be like, "What's wrong with you?" And the man is, "There's nothing wrong with me. I'm happy." They're going, "There's something wrong with him. He's depressed. What's wrong? Wake up. Where have you gone?" It's like, no, I'm just chill, man. I'm just listening. But the family would think there was something wrong with you, right? Oh no, he's depressed. He's going to kill himself.
He's not talking. Yes, I had that one when I was younger. Like, he's not talking. He's repressing. And
yeah. There's
actually
something wrong with him.
When I was a kid, I didn't think that I was doing that, and later on I was like, oh, I was doing that. But anyways.
Look, where to start? having an understanding of my ego, and when it's my ego that is about to jump in and speak. That doesn't mean that I don't have an ego. Of course I have an ego. We all do. It's necessary. Having a sense of identity is a part of being human. So that's fine. But we can develop a more acute awareness of our ego through practice and understanding. And it's so helpful, because if my partner says something and my ego wants to react, I can catch it now. I can go, take a breath, pause, and I call it out in my mind. I'm like, "Oh, ego, look at you go. You're desperate to be right in this moment, or you're desperate to place judgment, or you're desperate to justify your actions right now." Right? And I have this conversation with my ego, and I say, "Bless your cotton socks, ego. I love you. I know you're trying to keep us safe, but we're safe right now. There's no lion coming to eat us. We're not in danger. My woman has just said something and you've just had a reaction to it. That's okay. Just take a breath and then lean into the communication. Seek to understand. You've got nothing to defend. You don't need to defend anything. If your partner is wanting an explanation as to why you did something in a particular way, or how you're thinking about something, by all means, talk with each other, seek to understand. But it's this kind of aggressive, defensive, life and death energy that the ego has, because our ego identifies with our ideas, with our beliefs, with our political beliefs, with our ideologies. And then people go to war with each other over an idea or a belief. And they end up, fighting, either physically or psychologically, emotionally, verbally fighting. And it's unnecessary. It doesn't help. It doesn't help evolve the situation. I find anyway. So my partner and I don't fight. We just don't fight. And when we first got together, because we came from tumultuous relationships, we were like, are we supposed to fight? Do we need to fight? Is that where the sexual charge comes from? How are we going to stay sexually attracted to each other if we're not fighting? But we just didn't want to fight because we love each other. We don't want to be mean to each other. So we're just nice to each other. It doesn't mean we don't disagree, but we can disagree beautifully and with love. So the good news is that you don't have to fight to have sexual attraction. We're still very sexually attracted to each other, but we're just nice to each other. So, yeah.
There's one of the things that with a lot of my clients, that a lot of times and when I listen to them, I notice that there's a tendency to, when things start to get charged up, to continue until someone, in a sense, wins. And I say, what if in that moment you just call time out and you actually process the feelings and you come back when that charge is no longer there, so that you can actually listen to each other and you can share actually what's happening. And yet I think that as well, the more conscious that we are within our experience, the easier, of course, it will be to do that. Because one of the things that I usually share, I use a very differentiation between reaction and response. And for me, reaction is completely automatic pilot, all of those parts of ourselves that we haven't healed and integrated yet. And response is how we are wanting to respond. It's more conscious. And as you were saying, if it's not about my inner experience, it's not there. It is there. It's just that I'm not clinging into it. I'm not actually just reacting. I'm okay, you're there. I'm here with you, and I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to respond without escalating the situation, because escalation won't help us, as you're saying. And the escalation a lot of times is the problem, because I a lot of times I recognize, like, we all come with our baggage, we all come with our life experiences and all of our unprocessed feelings, and all of those buttons that someone can do something and suddenly it's like, they are triggering me. And the more aware that we become of that through practices, like I use meditation and a few other practices, but it can be whatever works for someone, to get us to that place of understanding. This is how I function. This is when someone does that. This is what happens to me. And it's not about them doing that. It's about me. Like actually responding in a way that is based on something, as you're saying, like it could be my 5-year-old that responded in one way, and the only way to actually work with that is through meditation or healing, or, as you were saying, a sweat lodge, and having experiences like that.
And when you think about it, really the only thing that's personal is what you do within yourself, your reactions, your triggers, your perceptions, your stuff. That's the only thing that's personal. When somebody else comes up and does something to you or triggers you, when someone comes up and makes it personal, I'm doing inverted commas, when they make it personal, they can't actually, it's not about you. They might come up to you and say, Brian, you're this and you're that, and they might say horrible things about you, but they're not actually talking about you objectively. They're talking about their perception of you. They can only know you in their mind. That's why if we got 10 people in the room who know you and we ask them to describe you in detail, you'll get 10 slightly different versions of Brian. So which one is the real Brian? None of them can actually completely know you objectively. They can only know their perception of you, their projection in their mind of you. So when someone comes up and does something to you personal, it's not personal. They're attacking their own projection. They're attacking themselves, And so the only thing that's personal is what you do to yourself, what you say to yourself, how you perceive and project your experience of reality. That's personal. So that's I believe that's the work to do. How do I talk to myself when I set myself a goal, when I wanted to live up to one of my values and I fell short, when I didn't show up in a way that I'm happy with, and then I have to come into some place of retribution or, self-coaching. How am I talking to myself? What's the quality of the words that I'm using on myself? Because quite often us humans are horrible to ourselves. The words we use are abusive. To any of your listeners, next time you're standing naked in front of the mirror and you're not feeling very good about yourself, have a listen to the choice of words. What are you calling yourself? Because that's abusive. It's self-abuse. Change it. Change the quality. Now, I'm not saying that you just kind of go, well, full self-acceptance, therefore I never need to improve and it doesn't matter how I show up. That's not what I'm saying. You can still have standards on yourself. You can still have your own core values. I want to be kind. I want to be compassionate, loving, generous, whatever they are, right? You can still aim to be the best version of you. It's just that when you fall short or you trip over or you make a mistake, because that's what we do, when that happens, coach yourself positively. There's no excuse to be cruel. Cruelty is just simply dysfunctional, full stop. I cannot think of a time when being cruel serves any functional purpose to yourself or to others. So it's just, I think this self-work is the only thing that's really personal. And that's what we should be working on, really,
Yes. Like as you're saying that, a few of my students the other day at university, we were working on starting to realize how to befriend our own experience and how to listen to those voices in our heads and how to actually notice the way that we are talking to ourselves. And like I gave them some practice, like going into the mirror as well, looking into their eyes and just seeing what comes up, not, like not doing anything, just seeing what comes up, to start to notice their self-talk and to start to realize that's their inner roommate. They are living with that there. How do you want to live with that? Do you want to have a good relationship, or do you want to have that critical relationship? So it's a lot of self work that is needed to do there. And Jem, as I noticed that we are starting to get towards the end of this episode, I wanted to ask you if you would be able to share a little bit on some ideas that you believe that everyone would want to have discovered perhaps earlier if they haven't yet, to be able to show up better for themselves and for others. And perhaps those are things that are in your book.
Yeah. The idea that I'd love to share, it seems simple, but it's deceptively simple. You are exactly who you're supposed to be. Perfectly imperfect. And you are completely enough. Completely enough. And perfectly enough to be you. And you shouldn't be more like anyone else, because you're not them, you're you. So apparently you're supposed to be you, because there you are, right? It's like, oh, wow, I am enough to be me. I don't need to be more like that person on social media, or I don't need to be more like that person down at the football club, or I don't need to be more like that person who's going out with my ex. I don't need to be more like, I'm actually completely enough. I wish I knew that when I was younger. That radical self-acceptance. And then it goes beyond self to everything. If we could take a snapshot in time, if we could freeze frame time and look at it right now, apparently everything is exactly as it's supposed to be. How do we know that? Well, reality tells us, because there it is. I love, there's an author, thinker from America called Byron Katie. Everyone just calls her Katie. And she says, you can argue with reality if you want to, but reality will win. Only 100% of the time. Right. And so, yeah, I would want the world to know that everything in this moment is exactly as it should be, including you. That doesn't mean we don't look to improve, to evolve, to grow, to expand into the future. It just means that right now, you are exactly who you're supposed to be, and you're enough, and you deserve all the happiness that you can manifest. You know, you really do. That's what I'd want the world to know.
That's so beautiful. And I love as well that where we are now not only is enough, it's perfect. And there's in the next moment a new version as well of ourselves. Yeah. If we choose to. Yeah. We can stay where we are, or we can go to the next version of ourselves, because this is my understanding. Each moment we can choose. Each moment there's an opportunity for change, whether we want to call it growth or not, that there's always a new version of ourselves if we want to choose that. It's one of the things that I remember my teacher saying so much. If you don't like what's happening now you can choose. Now you can choose. Now you can choose. Now you can choose. Like, how many of these moments do you want? Because it's every single nanosecond that you can choose. But I love that message, because I think that a lot of people, a lot of times haven't heard that, that they are enough, and all that they need to do is to be themselves. Yeah. We live in a world where there's a lot of comparison, and there's a lot of, as you shared before, a lot of that false comparison based on what we might see as the snapshot of someone's life, that curated social media presence, or even, as you said, like, it seems that you have the perfect life where inside that's not the case. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Beautiful. And for everyone that is resonating with some of the things that you're sharing, where can they find more about what you're doing, and what are the things that they might, if they want to do and work with you? Yeah, sure. I'd love it if you felt like reading my book, and I can recommend my book now wholeheartedly, because the feedback that I've been getting from around the world is so beautiful. People are emailing me and thanking me for writing this book, because it's helping people. So grab the book. You can get that from Amazon or Booktopia or wherever, or just off my website, jemfuller.com. And on the website, you can contact me. You can email me through the website. You can find out about the retreats that I run. We run retreats in the Himalaya and Bali and other places. I work with leaders all around the world now, and especially over the last couple of years, taking everything online means that I can do that. We're forming a group of leaders specifically to talk about communication, conscious communication for the modern leader. If you're interested in that group, just email me or follow me on Instagram, Jem Fuller, Facebook, Jem Fuller, LinkedIn, Jem Fuller. A little bit of warning, I have a team that manage those accounts. So you might be talking with someone on my team. But if you want to just reach out directly to me, just email me through the website. Beautiful. And we'll have those links on the show notes so that everybody can access to all of it easier. So if you're listening to us now, whatever it is that you are, leave us a comment if you resonated with something that we talked about, and whatever it is on any platform. We'd love to know what's your experience with conscious communication, conscious leadership. So leave us a comment on that. And thank you once again, Jem, for this wonderful sharing, for this conversation, and for the work that you're doing, because it's so needed. You're welcome. Yeah, thank you again for having me on. And it was a really lovely conversation. That was beautiful. Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone, for listening as well. And we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.